These communist scum have to be exposed, but this is a violent attempt at overthrowing the United States government. This is a violent attempt by communist organizations. It appears to me, after today's information, posing as a social justice warrior group, it appears to me that these are actual working communists inside the USA trying to overthrow our government. They started with the statues, just like ISIS in Iraq toppled statues and monuments.
The communists in America already have a constitution written, and that's no joke. That's pretty serious.
Communism is a system that brings people together and utilizes the resources that are created through the work and toil and ingenuity of 7 billion people on this planet, and it puts them in the hands and the service of those 7 billion. And people have been lied to about communism by the powers that be, just like they were lied to about the weapons of mass destruction that supposedly existed in Iraq. It's not surprising that people have been confused about communism. Learning about the history of communism in this country is like learning about the history of slavery from a bunch of Confederate generals. It's pumped out by the media and the ruling class structures and institutions that are afraid of and communist revolution and want to reinforce the system. People who want the truth should go to redcom.us, the website, and you should check out the Constitution for the new Socialist Republic of North America, which was written by Bob Avakian, which is the document that we will implement day one after the revolution. And this document enshrines and protects and stands on the most fundamental right of all, which is the right of the masses of people to rise up and get free of their exploitation and oppression. That is a right that has not been and cannot be guaranteed under the U.S. Constitution, which serves and enforces a system of exploitation. It is the rights that will be enshrined and protected and given real meaning in the new Socialist Republic of North America. People can find that document at redcom.us. It was written by Bob Avakian, the chairman of the Revolutionary Communist Party.
Because we're in a position right now where if we just go off and try to get in a gun battle with these people, we're not going to get very far. Here's what we need. What we actually need is we need to get organized for a real revolution to overthrow their whole system.
Right on.
What?
Yeah.
I'm in the Revolution Club, and that's what we're getting organized to do.
That's what we need.
This person on my t-shirt, his name is Bob Avakian. Bob Avakian leads the Revolutionary Communist Party. Bob Avakian is leading the revolution right now. There's a plan. We have a plan for how to defeat them. And I'm not talking about how to defeat a couple Nazis in Charlottesville. I'm talking about how to defeat their whole system. They have military forces. They have a whole mighty power that they unleash on people all over the world. All of that is going to have to be defeated to uproot this capitalist system that spawned Trump and Pence, that unleashes white supremacy. When you got a white supremacist system, it's not a surprise that you got a bunch of white supremacists running around. If we're going to put an end to that, we got to put an end to that system. So what I'm telling everybody here is now is the time to organize forces for an actual revolution. And Bob Avakian, he's a communist. And what he's done is he's developed a new communism. He's looked at the experience of people fighting all over the world and the understanding people have developed, bringing this forward all over the world to get all of humanity free. Not one country over another, not one people over another. Uproot all oppression and get all of humanity free. That's the work that Bob Avakian has done. That's the science that he's developed. There's a strategy for revolution that we've developed on that, and everybody needs to get this newspaper and get a copy of the outline of that strategy, which is in this paper called Revolution. There's a constitution that Bob Avakian has written for a new socialist republic. We got a constitution.
There's a constitution that Bob Avakian has written for a new socialist republic. We got a constitution.
He wants me to, okay, that's a good question. He wants me to define my judicial system where only I get to make the rules. I can't do that for you because that's not the judicial system I'm advocating for. That's a gross distortion. There's a constitution. It has laws and rights. This is after a revolution. Bear with me. After a revolution, this is the constitution I would like to see imposed on society. It's a framework that guarantees people's right to eat. It guarantees their ability to work together to overcome. I'm answering you. You have to give me a moment. No. And
she's answering your question.
But she's not talking about the judicial system. She's talking about.
I'm getting there. You know what? I'm getting there. All right. So anyway, in this book, it's a framework. framework, as opposed to this constitution, which is based on exploitation and plunder here and all over the world. It's a constitution, the U.S. Constitution of a capitalist society. This is a constitution for a socialist society that is meeting the needs of the people, that is caring for the environment, that is not governed by profit, and that is serving the world revolution. In this constitution, it says explicitly, everybody is subject to the same rule of law. I'm not going to read you a 88-page constitution right now. There's a lot of laws and regulations in it, and they apply to everybody. They're not arbitrary. I don't make them up. You know, I saw Ann Coulter the other day. She was on one of these, I don't know which, she was all over the circuit of the media talking about being canceled here, and she was talking to Robert Reich, and they both were agreeing that in the First Amendment, there's no asterisks. She was saying there's no asterisks. It doesn't say you have free speech to say this, that, and the other, but not X, Y, and Z. And that was her point. But actually, if you look at the First Amendment, you look at the Constitution, when it was written, she said, maybe you're smarter than our founders, but there was no asterisk. If you look at the Constitution, and when it was written, there was an invisible asterisk, because the right to speak was completely denied to African and black people who were enslaved. It was completely denied to Native people who had no rights. So I'm using this as a segue to respond to your question. The distinction to the John Stuart Mill point I was quoting, that people should hear ideas put forward by their most ardent advocates, is that those who have to go up against entrenched authority and the power of the state need special protection and platform to do so. Those who are putting forward the ideas which are entrenched in the state, which are being given the backing of the military, of the police forces, of the courts, those who are being given the backing of institutions like universities and the media, they do not need extra protection. That's the distinction. And that's why I said, you know, after a revolution, speaking for myself as a communist and as a supporter of the Revolutionary Communist Party and the Constitution for the new Socialist Republic, it makes special protections. It's written into the Constitution that if you want to criticize the government and even advocate getting rid of our government and replacing it with a different system, you will have the protection to do so.
We already have that. That's called the First Amendment. That's what it is.
But it's not actually true. No, I'm sorry. That's actually very, very not true.
Okay, you have not read history then. Seriously.
Okay, so you're going to dispute that when the Constitution was written, black people had no access to those rights. You're going to dispute that right now.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying right now. That is what the First Amendment gives us.
No, it doesn't actually. People are being arrested for protesting across this country. They're passing laws in North Dakota that you can be killed with a car. You could be, no, I'm quoting laws that they're passing right now, that you could be run over and killed with a car if you're part of a protest, as long as the person who hits you and kills you claims it was an accident.
You can also be arrested for laughing at jokes.
Okay,
That's a good point. Yes. She makes a good point. You also, they just convicted a woman who was, this brother right here was also there that day, the day that Jeff Sessions was doing his confirmation hearing, and he and others got up and disrupted. He got arrested for speaking there, but this other woman didn't even get up to speak. There was somebody saying, Jeff Sessions is such a good guy. He is not a racist. He's a really nice guy. And she started laughing. She couldn't contain herself. She is now convicted, okay? That First Amendment that you say...
Of what? He is a racist. I think most people agree.
They have a constitution for their revolution that they want to create in the United States. She states that freedom of speech is protected in it. Well, I have a copy of it right here. It's online. I'm going to leave you a link. In fact, I'm going to put this on the screen so you can read right along with me. Freedom of speech, comma, of assembly and association, and of dissent and protest shall not be restricted except in cases of violation of the law and through due process of the law. So, there's a big fat asterisk next to her freedom of speech. And it states that expression of opposition to this Republican Constitution and government, including advocacy in favor of abolishing it and replacing it with another type of society, shall not be prohibited. So it's permitted and protected. Except, see, that's the thing, is they say, oh, it's protected, and then they say, except as this shall involve commission, active conspiracy to commit, or the direct and immediate advocacy of violent acts which are not in self-defense. Isn't that what they do? Isn't that what the left is doing? Isn't that what her organization is doing? They're taking credit for Berkeley, that they worked right alongside with BAM against the government or members of the government or others residing in the Republic. I mean, one of the other ridiculous things about her 2-hour and change talk from Berkeley after the Ann Coulter incident that the excerpt is from, she is stating throughout that speech that basically she's calling Milo Yiannopoulos, Ann Coulter, and David Horowitz to be agents of the government. I mean, if this isn't utterly ridiculous, being a fan of, having voted for or spoke on favor of someone who became the president, and she basically says that makes you an agent of the government. This is who we're dealing with. This is the kind of people that we are dealing with. This is basically an Antifa group. And this is actually the biggest Antifa group. So this is who we're dealing with. We're dealing with a group with deep pockets. They are funded by Soros. I saw recently some sort of post that Soros gave them $50,000, which is nothing for someone like Soros and for a large organization. But who knows how often he does that and how often he does that through other organizations. And they also ask the public for money. And they trick people. They trick people into thinking that they're not about a communist revolution. And also they specifically go after young people and people who maybe wouldn't realize that, communism, anybody who's my age or older should know better, because when I was a child, I'm old enough that my childhood was partly during the Cold War, and then when I was in high school was about when the Cold War was ending. So I know better. I won't say every day, but when I was in school, we used to sit there with the paper and talk about the arms race, and we'd talk about, why we don't like communism. And before that, people who are even older than me, the Korean War was essentially a war against communism. The Vietnam War was a war against communism. We were very concerned about communism. Anybody older than me should definitely understand, and people my age and older should understand. So, communism is it's crazy. It's really crazy. Basically the government ends up owning every company. So, there's a lot of people that are sitting here backing this stuff that should be going up against them, because if they took over, they would take over all the companies. So they would take over companies like Google and stuff. And Google thinks they're hot stuff, and they're, creating censorship and not allowing us to say what we want to on YouTube, because everything is hate speech. Maybe this will get taken off of YouTube because they'll call this hate speech. But YouTube should wise up, because if they get their way and they take over the government and they overthrow it and they create this communist United States of America, they would basically just steal all the companies. They would just take them. And if you own a house, they will take your house. Everything you own, they would just... This recently happened in Venezuela. People who own houses, they just kicked everybody out of their houses, and they're putting them in apartment buildings, and no one can go in or out of the country. So, communism is pretty bad news. I mean, same with North Korea. You can't go in or out of the country. In North Korea, you can't even wear denim. So, and this, I'm going to cover this again, but this constitution explicitly states that they're looking to form a dictatorship.